Hello everyone, Sean Reynolds here. You guys are having a blessed and wonderful day. Now, if you've ever heard of the Brownian Ratchet concept, I'm showing an image on the screen. They say that this is a concept that does work. Essentially, you have a gear in one box, then you have a rod that connects the gear and runs across to a fan that rotates in another box. Now they have to be in separate boxes because here's the thing, the temperature in both boxes have to be different. Okay, the temperature in the box with the gear has to be colder than the temperature of the box with the rotating fan. Now what makes the fan rotate is a certain gas you put in there, and the particles bounce around and it makes the fan rotate. But if you built this on a much bigger scale, this is what I'm getting at. So this concept, the Brownian design, of course I did not come up with that. But the issue here is, how do you make this work now without having to produce energy, exterior energy, in order to keep one half colder than the other? My theory, let's take this whole design. They have it always going horizontal. Let's flip it vertical. Okay, let's flip it on its side. And we're going to build this on a large scale, of course. But if you stood it up, maybe, and here's just an example, maybe made the rod, maybe made it to where the gearbox, I'll just call it that, goes down 100 feet in the ground, for instance. We're going to bury it in the ground, 100 feet. But we're only going to bury the bottom 3/4 of it, because we're going to let the top quarter of it stick up out of the ground. You get where I'm going with this? When we go under the ground, the deeper we go, to a certain point, the cooler it gets. That naturally is going to keep that lower box with the gear colder. And so this is my idea. Why can't we just do that, and that be the solution to make this thing work? Now, of course, it can be argued that by turning it vertical, that is putting weight on the bottom tip of it, right? And so the problem then that would need to be solved is to create some kind of easily, and this may already be solved, I don't know, but it would need to rotate very freely, right? And be able to support a lot of weight at the same time. And of course, the idea would be to build many of these things in lots of places to produce this power that requires no fossil fuels, requires nothing really. Just build it and let it sit there. Maybe maintenance every few months or whatever, check on it. That's all it would need. And just to kind of caveat on what I just said, we could actually get away with not having to turn it vertical. We could actually keep it horizontal, but bury the side with the rotating gear, right? Have it 3/4 of the way into a mountain. You see, where it will be colder, or bury it with something that would keep it naturally colder without having to produce energy. The thing is just to keep it cooler than the other side, with the rotating fan, you see. Okay, so since you begged me, I guess I'll share with you a few of my other ideas. All right, here we go. So many of you probably heard of the water wheel design. So this is how this typically works. There's water at the top pan there. Goes down, rotates that wheel, you see. But my design includes these 3 rotating gears, okay, all 3. And as you can see, by incorporating another gear, you're able to incorporate another belt. You see how the belts wrap around, like gear 3 to gear 1 has a belt, and then from gear 1 to gear 2 has a belt. And you can see how you have water in the top pan there, and it pours out the spout there in the middle, okay? Well, that spout, when it pours out, it's going to rotate gear number 2, okay? But gear number 2, as it rotates, it also dips down in the water. And as it rotates, you can see it pours water out the top there and just continues that cycle. Okay, the way this works, you can see that since gear number 2 and gear number 1 are connected, right? So as gear number 2 rotates, that's going to make gear number 1 rotate, which is going to make gear number 3 rotate. So now we have 2 belts going, operated by the same flow of water, right? And so, but you see that the belt that runs between gear 1 and gear 3 also carries water buckets. Okay, I'll just call them water holders or whatever. Just like gear number 2 with the fans, those are kind of water holders. This belt also has water holders connected to it. So as it rotates, it's also dipping water and pouring water back into the fan. So instead of just having the one source that's dipping water and pouring into the fan, my improvement is to have two dipping water holders adding water to the pan. Okay, so that solves the issue, which before was that they couldn't get enough water supply in the pan to keep the rotation going. But my design here, as you see, since it includes a whole nother gear, enabling a whole nother belt to be attached to it, we're working on two sources to keep the pan filled instead of just one. And so there's plenty of water being added to the pan in order to keep this turning theoretically eternally. Of course, when I say eternally, we had to factor in, that's my chickens, by the way. They like to talk the same time I do for some reason. But we had to factor in the fact that water evaporates over time, so of course we'd have to refill the water over time. But, I mean, come on now. Or we can dodge that problem altogether by just putting this thing in a pond or in a lake or something, building these things out in the ocean where there's a continuous supply of water to be rotated, right? So here's another similar design of mine that kind of works on the same principle, except the bottom left gear turns and rotates the bottom right gear, and along that belt is fans which pump water up the hose, you see, which pour out onto the fans, which cause it to rotate in the first place. I'm not sure how plausible this one is, but yeah, this is an older idea of mine. I've had quite a few over the years. So now we're going to crack open a few other ideas of mine. These are more or less concepts based upon other people's ideas. I did not come up with this concept, but I did come up with the concept of weighing it down. Now, just to give you a brief on how this works, of course, the idea is to get this weight lifted up to here, and then it slowly falls throughout the day or the week or however long it takes it to fall. And as it falls, it's rotating these gears. Now, this is built on such a huge level, right, that these gears are rotating a lot, and that's generating power. But the issue is, how do we lift this weight to begin with? You see, without, if for instance this weighs 100 tons, well, this weight has to be more than 100 tons to pick this up, and so that's requiring fossil fuels and all kind of other energy to be burned. Well, instead of doing that, let's just build a great big 2 or 3 level ramp, right? And let's get a bunch of people. It'll work kind of like, court summons or whatever. This would be like a community effort. And so, every once a month or once every 3 months, they would appoint however many people it takes to weigh the weight down, right? To come out and just stand on the platform to weigh it down and get paid to do it at that, or maybe even get a percentage off of their energy bill or whatever, since this is producing energy. And since you have people living in urban areas anyway, you have a lot of people congregated together. It wouldn't be hard to get this many people together to stand on this platform, once a day or once every few days. And like I said, it wouldn't have to be the same people. It would be rotated. It would be on a rotation schedule. It wouldn't be hard, and you wouldn't have to deal with parking or any of that, since most of these people are living in a city and they're in that one area anyway. So the idea would be to stagger these towers throughout urban areas where there's a lot of people that get together, and from that one tower alone, they could probably produce enough power, if we do it right, to power their whole neighborhood. And there could be more than one tower, even have 2 or 3 towers, whatever it takes. Even if they have to go from one platform, stand on a few minutes, weigh it down, then walk over to another platform, stand a few minutes to weigh it down, and get paid to do it, of course. Why aren't we doing stuff like this instead of burning fossil fuels repeatedly? Come on now. Now, I'm just going to come out and say it. I'm not fat phobic, but I do believe that it's good for a person to be healthy, and being extremely overweight is not healthy. But I could see how this idea could potentially evolve into a situation where they monopolize this for the bigger people. You get my drift? They wouldn't have to hire as many people, because, if you got one person that weighs as much as 5 people, I'm sorry. So you see what I'm saying there? You get where I'm going there? I'm talking about you, Nikocado Avocado. It would have to be a fair system. As with all things, anything can be corrupted, and this is one avenue I could see of them trying to corrupt it. It would need to be a fair system, right? And that's not details I'm going to work out, but I just wanted to point that out, all right? Now, I don't have an illustration for my next design idea, but it would only work near coastal areas. The idea is, you know how you can fill up a tank and then have a spout at the bottom, and as the water pours out, right, it trickles down, it can turn a wheel, and of course turning that wheel can produce power. So this kind of works on the same concept, but instead of having to use electricity and fossil fuels to pump water to keep these tanks full, right? Or instead of even having to pay people to take bucket loads of water back and forth to keep these tanks full, we could use the tides. So as the tide goes up, okay, we'll have these buckets positioned to where they get filled with water as the tide goes up, and then as the tide goes down, right? You get my drift? The buckets still hold the water, and then there's a spout at the bottom that controls the flow of water and turns the wheel throughout the day. And we have this going each and every day on a continuous cycle. And we build these things all around the coast. Why aren't we doing stuff like this, right? And to add to that, you know, the design I showed earlier about having to lift for instance, 100-ton weight up, you know, using the people. Instead of using people, we could build these things next to the coastline, right? And as the water rises, that could be the force that lifts the weight up in a boat. The weight will be heavy, but it'll be to where it can float, right? So as the tides go up, it'll lift it up automatically, and then as the tides go down, that thing's going to fall, but slowly, turning that wheel at the top of the tower, generating power. So that's one way of doing it without having to, you know, do my other funny idea. Now, the final one I want to talk about here is not really my concept, because I've heard of at least one other person on YouTube talking about this at one point, but I'm expounding on it. When you have a busy city, right, you got cars moving around, you got people moving, all these are energy producing things, right? As people move around, whether by driving or walking, they periodically pass a small energy producing unit which rotates. The whole thing is built on rotation, like fans or whatever. Things that rotate as like, for instance, when a car drives down the highway, that's going to rotate fans. You can line the highway with 100,000 fans, and each one of these connected. Each one of these are producing electricity, right? You know, not only are we not having to burn fossil fuels to produce these electricity, but we're taking advantage of the cars that are already driving up and down this highway, producing the wind. Okay, but do the same thing with people through busy places where people walk. As people walk by things and walk past things, this can be turning fans and turning gears and working on the same thing. And when you have hundreds of thousands of these, millions of them even, tied into a network, right? And attached to batteries, just, you know, periodically here and there to keep these things produce energy, and they keep these batteries charged. You see, and this could be a way of producing electricity, free electricity, without having to burn fossil fuels in a big city area. So I'm going to wrap this video up. Thanks for watching. Yeah, these have just been a few ideas. You know, I'm not a genius or anything. In fact, the reason why I'm sharing these ideas is hopefully some of you out there can come up with some ideas, chip in, you know, we can improve upon my ideas or even come up with something even better. Because obviously the way, you know, they've been doing things, you know, ain't the smart way, because there's better ways of doing this. Now, obviously, most of my concepts have been on a society level, you know, for communities. But I could also see how these designs could be turned to support individual families, individual households, off-grid households, so to speak. And of course, I guess the powers that be, so to speak, talking about the global elitists, they don't want, you know, they don't want people to be that independent. So I don't know. But anyway, yeah, we got to be independent anyway. Who cares what they say? Now, something else to consider, it's not all about electricity production, right? For instance, you can use windmills to pump water. You know, that's not producing electricity, that's making a pump work, which pulls water up out of the ground, right? And so if you have access to wind, you can produce power or even convert that into electricity if you want to. If you have access to moving water, the same principle applies, right? But also, if you have access to heat, something that you can produce steam with, right? You can also produce not only electricity, but as I said before, movement. For instance, consider the steam engine. That's how they worked. Was steam. There was no electricity, and that pressure, kind of like a pressure cooker. That pressure, you can convert that into energy to make things move. And so it's not all about electricity. It's also about making things move and function in a way that is convenient, and accessible for us. And lastly, I want to say that I think the biggest overlooked, energy producing natural thing that exists, right, is just gravity, simply gravity. Even you can create small devices that may require a human to come and pull it down, once every day or something. But it's a weight. You pull it down, and then the weight slowly falls, and as it falls, it turns a gear, right? Producing electricity. They've even made concepts like this, like that'll power a light or a radio or something like that. But if you built something like this on a bigger scale, a family-size scale, for instance, you could produce much more electricity. But gravity, right? This is something we have to think about. That's something that's everywhere. It's universal here on Earth, right? So, and if we can just find an easier method of counteracting that gravity, to where we can lift heavier weights and produce more electricity without having to burn fossil fuels, or without even requiring a bunch of people out there to lift these weights. That's the question. That's the key. But I think there is an answer. I know there's an answer. Think of the pyramids. The ancient Egyptians, they powered their whole community through, these methods that we haven't even considered yet. We don't even know about, but the truth is out there. We just have to keep looking. They say that perpetual motion machines are impossible, but that's simply not true. All right, the Brownian Ratchet design is possible, and not only possible, but they've made them. They do in fact work, and they would spin eternally. Just the issue, of course, is keeping one side cooler than the other. And like I said, I think if we build it the way I suggested it, that would solve that problem. But there's other ways, more accessible ways to everyday people like us. I know there is. We just have to keep looking. So, yeah, who cares what the scientists say? They can say all they want, right? A lot of stuff, what they say is true, but a lot of stuff, what they say is theory, right? It's true until proven not true. Yeah, that's how the scientific community works. But we who think outside the scientific community, we consider what they say, but we also consider other observations made by other people and made by ourselves, right? And that's how we come to the conclusions that we know about things. And so scientists say perpetual motion is impossible. I say that's bullcrap. Anyway, happy trails.